welcome you.
Thank you.
And as with Mr. Ramos, I want to first give Senator Price, our esteemed colleague and the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, the opportunity to introduce you, to give you then the opportunity to make a brief opening comment and introduce any family member or special guest who's with you, and then we will commence important questioning.
Very good.
Very good. Senator Price.
Another short session, I presume, right? Another short.
Yes.
That's all right. That's all right.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce California State University trustee Herb Carter. Trustee Carter has a long history and love for education, and especially that of higher education in California State University. He's been a part of the CSU family for over 35 years, ranging in capacity from a professor to an interim campus president to his current position as the CSU Board of Trustees chair. Trustee Carter has sat on the CSU's board since 2004 and is currently hoping to continue to have the opportunity in that role until 2019. In addition to his educational career work, Dr. Carter has served as a lecturer in public and private colleges and universities in Southern California. He has also made presentations to groups at Los Angeles City College, the Los Angeles Unified School District, and the Compton Unified School District. He's also heavily involved in his community and local service organizations, including serving as a regent for Loyola Marymount University, member of the Citizens Advisory Committee on School Integration for the Los Angeles Unified School District, member and vice chairman of the Board of Directors for the California Achievement Council, and member of the National Task Force on Minority Achievement in Higher Education. His contributions to the community have been widely recognized, receiving such honors as Educator of the Year from the Inner City Exchange, the Los Angeles Urban League's Community Leadership Award, the Golden State Minority Scholarship Fund's Medal of Excellence, a California State Senate Commendation for Outstanding Community Leadership, the California State Assembly's Outstanding Citizen Award, and a U.S. Congressional Commendation for Community Leadership. Trustee Carter's willingness to educate himself on the issues critical to the state's educational needs and his ability to be part of the solution is perfectly matched for the needs of the CSU board. It goes without saying that Trustee Carter views education and the California State University's role in that at a high regard. He has a wide breadth of knowledge on a myriad of educational issues from his past experience and history, and that leads him to perfectly to continue in this role on the CSU's Board of Trustees. Trustee Carter has been a friend and a mentor to thousands of individuals up and down the state, across this country. On behalf of the citizens of the 26th Senate District, my colleagues in the California Legislative Black Caucus, and other members of our legislative body, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Trustee Carter.
Thank you very much, Senator Price, again for taking the time and for your patience and for introducing Chair Carter. And we welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
And invite you again to please introduce family special guest and a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my senator for being here to introduce me. He is not only a distinguished person here in these chambers, he is a very distinguished citizen in my community, and I could not have been introduced by anyone that I respected more than the person who represents me. So thank you, Senator Price.
Thank you, Doctor.
I'd like to introduce another person, Mr. Chairman, a graduate of Cal State Dominguez Hills, a retired probate referee for the state of California, my wife of 43 years, Virginia Carter.
Welcome. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
As to opening statements, Mr. Chairman, I remember fondly when I was in high school in a public speaking class, the teacher gave me what she described as the 3 B's of speaking at any time. It is begin, be brief, and be on your way. So I do not have a tremendous opening statement to make. It is clear that I have been a fixture in the CSU system for over 30 years. I have held every level of position in that system, from an entering staff person in 1974 as the first affirmative action officer for the California State University system until I took a leave of absence some 20 years later to go serve as the president and CEO of United Way of Los Angeles, where I had been the first person of color to chair that board, which a record I think still stands. I then went back to the university system, served for 4 years in a variety of consulting roles with the chancellor of the system, particularly looking at issues involving troubled presidencies and trying to help the system deal with those in a way that was both humane and was in the best interest of the university in question. It was at that point that I had a telephone call from the office of the then governor of this state to inquire as to whether or not I would be willing to consider serving on the board of trustees of the system. My initial response to that was, I don't think so. I think I've given the CSU about all I care to do. I figured that I had an ace in the hole anyway, so my good way of dealing with that was to say to the caller, this is a big step, and I need to talk to my wife about this. For we are now spending time together in ways that we have not in most of our marriage, and so I'm going to go talk to my wife about this, and I'll get back to you. And I did. I went home, and I told my wife that I'd had this telephone call, and I said something to the effect that obviously they're not really sane at this point to think that I'm going to do this. And I told them that you were going to tell me that I couldn't do it. And she said, I think it's a great idea. And I wound up then doing the service that I'm doing. Education is not a passing thing for me. It is a passion. It is a commitment. It is the thing that got me from a small town in Arkansas to the highest levels of leadership in the university system in California. I know how much it means to students. My position is very clear that the business that we're in is for students. It's not for faculty members or staff members or administrators, other than how their roles are incidental to the succession of the educational aspirations of students. That's what we're about, and I try to make that clear at every opportunity in my role as a member of the Board of Trustees. I am here to respond to your questions. I'm sure you have a number of them. What you will get from me is an honest and open answer. Sometimes that might not please you, and I apologize in advance for that, but it is the value which guides my life. And at that, I'm finished.
We're not evaluating you necessarily on whether we agree or disagree with your opinions, but on the strength of your commitment to higher education and on just how you deal in these kinds of situations. So we want to have an honest, tough conversation about the CSU and the future of higher education. All right? Senator Alquist, we'll begin with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pro Tem. And Trustee Carter, I have enjoyed our conversations, our lengthy conversations, and I have great respect for all that you have contributed to the state of California. I have a great interest in this issue of higher education, having chaired the Assembly Higher Ed Committee for 2 years in the Assembly, having been on a college board of trustees for 6 years in Illinois, having been on CPEC, the California Post-Secondary Education Commission, for 3 years back in 93, 94, and 95. I am an unwavering champion for CSU students and the system. But there's one issue I would really like to talk about, and I know it won't be a surprise, and I've talked with many CSU trustees on this particular issue, and that is when the trustees gave a $100,000 raise to a campus president, San Diego State, on the very same day the trustees voted to increase student tuition. Mm-hmm. I know that within time, the CSU Board of Trustees created a policy, and I'd like to speak to two pieces of that. Briefly on the one piece, the comparator, it took many discussions with CSU trustees to say that, you know, you really can't compare CSU to institutions that have graduate school, med schools, and law schools in order to compare salaries for presidents. It's like comparing apples and oranges. And I know that that has been revised somewhat, and I don't really want to spend much time right here on that, but to acknowledge some changes were made. They were positive. I don't think they went far enough, but they were in the right direction. Where I would like to spend time is on the piece of this policy that says, notwithstanding the presidential compensation criteria enumerated above, and until the Board of Trustees of the California State University determines otherwise, and then it goes on to state what happens, the issue really is about, should the CSU give huge presidential salary increases in the same year that it raises student fees and tuition? I think not. Mm-hmm. I feel very strongly about this, and probably I take it even personally as when I was midway through my college career and had a scholarship that said you can never get less than a 3.0, and I was a mathematics major with some tough courses, and I got B's and A's in math, but I had an English teacher who looked at me and said, you know, and I understood that I had to get a B in English to keep my scholarship. And she looked at me, Hilda, and said, would you become an English major? And I knew the ramifications of my answer, and I said, no, I want to be a math teacher. I want to help math students. So I lost my scholarship. The college had to come up with a different scholarship for me. But for a whole month or two of the whole summer, my parents were excited I would be back home in St. Louis, the Greek community here, but I was dismayed, and eventually it worked out. But I understand how what can seem a small amount of money to some people is going to be a huge amount of money to students and their families when it comes to the planning process. And where I really am is that if I look at this policy, it's like a resolution, and it says we're going to do this until we change our mind, and then we can do something else. It gives no security or assurance to students and their families that you will never raise student tuition and fees in the same year that you're giving these large presidential salary increases. That is my main point. There are other things I can say, and when it comes back to me later, possibly, but what do you really think about having something that would be binding? Because this is not. That'll be my only question for now. Because there's to me, there's nothing binding about a policy. It would be binding if it became state law. And you can tell me what you think about it becoming a law.
Okay.
And about the binding piece. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Ahlquist. You and I have had a number of discussions about these issues. I want to give a fair credit to you for influencing my decisions about how we ought to deal with salaries in the present term. It was upon reading your proposed legislation, which indicated that an increase to a new president coming into a position should not have compensation above 10% over the former person in the job. And you also included in that the issues of when we were raising tuition. If you look carefully at the policy which I proposed to the board last week and which the board ultimately adopted, it took the 10% recommendation that was contained in your proposed bill, but did not take the reservation about whether this could occur or not occur at a point in time when we were raising tuition. As a matter of fact, it has made very clear that it holds, irrespective of those other conditions, 10% increase on the base of a new salary on any condition is the part of the board policy. The second part of it has to do with whether or not the salary setting authority for the CSU system, not just the presidents, ought to be inscribed in legislation. I do not think that's a good idea, and I've said so. I believe that the board ought to have the responsibility to handle the matters that come before it with respect to governance, and compensation is just one of those issues. I will tell this committee, as I have told many of you, I think most of you in private meetings, that it was a mistake to have on the agenda the issue of the salary for the president of the new president of San Diego State, and an increase in the tuition on the same agenda. I assume responsibility for that. As chair of the board, it was on my insistence that the salary of the new president be reported to the public in the first meeting after that salary was established. And I did not take the time to look at the fact that we were going to be dealing with a tuition issue at the same time. So I just, my view is that it would not have mattered if I had moved it one way or the other. Once it was done, it was going to be an unacceptable pattern of behavior in terms of setting salaries. And so I've tried, in the addition that I made to the report of the special committee, to establish a way so that those salaries would be held at an acceptable level, acceptable at least in terms of the proposed legislation that had been introduced by Senator Lieu. That was 150% of the salary of the head of the state Supreme Court. That comes out to about $323,000 a year. Under my proposal, a new entering president would not be paid over $325,000 a year. So I've tried to be responsive, but at the same time, I've said that I believe that we should have the authority as a board to set those salaries, and we should be held accountable.
So, and not to put any words in your mouth, because I think this is what you've said, you believe it should not be binding that presidential salaries are significantly increased in the same years that you raise student fees. And if that's the case, then what kind of security do students and families have to plan the cost of a higher education, whether it's going to change tomorrow or next year?
We are obligated to provide early warning to parents and people who are responsible for paying bills, tuition in this system, as early a notice as we can give. We try to give that a year in advance, as a matter of fact. I just, there's no other way I can say this. I believe that the salary setting authority for employees within the context of available resources ought to be made by the board.
Okay. So I guess for now, at this point, my closing comment would be, I really think it's unconscionable for the CSU Board of Trustees, I'm not singling you out, but the whole board, I've talked to several people, feel that it's all right to raise student fees and tuition in the same years that you give huge salary increases to presidents.
I know, Mr. Chair, we need to move on to other questions, but the proposal that the board adopted last week does not say that. It says you cannot raise the tuition more than 10% at any time. At any time. Not just when we raise just when we raise tuition, but at any time.
And I'm looking at your policy that says you can do what you want until you determine you don't want to do it. Thank you.
And I think, if I might, just to
Please,
pick up on
that
this,
was my closing.
before I get it, and we'll go to Senator Fuller, but I just think on this particular subject, maybe this is a way to not provide complete assurance, but maybe some assurance, and it's to ask you for this commitment, Chair Carter, and that is, if you are confirmed in this position, you will have, what, a 4-year term going forward? Is that right?
As a trustee, potentially I could have 8 years.
8, excuse me. Well,
8 years.
Right, I forgot.
I will only be the chair of the board for another 6 months.
Okay, for 6 months and then 8 years, but you'll maintain a significant amount of influence. Can you commit to this committee that certainly during your remaining tenure as chair of the board and during your time as trustee, that you will do everything in your power to assure that the policy which the board itself adopted last week will remain the policy of the board, namely no more than a 10% increase for a CSU president at any of the universities?
I'm prepared to do that. I think it's a sane policy. Obviously, I thought it when I proposed it. Okay. I am committed to it. There might be at some point, long beyond my ability to predict, a need to reassess that policy. If that ever were to occur, the board would have to do it in a sunshine way, would have to do it publicly with full awareness of all of the constituencies in this state, and I think it highly unlikely that they would change it.
And in consultation with the legislature.
In consultation with the legislature, the governor, the students, the faculty, the business community, all of the people who have an impact on our decisions.
So, Senator Alquist, obviously, and I think a lot of us might prefer a statute, but at least for purposes of this hearing, we're hearing a commitment that you're going to do everything in your power to keep that 10% policy intact for the 8 years that you have as trustee.
You have my assurance of that.
Thank you. Senator Fuller.
First, I'd like to thank you very much. You were very gracious in your answers to my questions. You're a very honest individual, and I regard your integrity as the very highest, and I want to start with that. I think the question that I would like to ask today, and I'm probably going to only ask one, is because Senator Alquist has covered really a lot of the territory that I would probably have asked, but if you consider the context that Senator Alquist has been concerned about and that you and I discussed, and that I think I made it very clear what some of my thoughts were on that, and you certainly were great at answering them and clarifying them. I think that your service has just been exemplary, but I'm a little concerned about how your long years of service, but I'm just a little concerned about, given the context of the public is very, very angry right now. They're very, very angry about their fees. They're very, very angry about the salaries. And we're about to place you in a slot that's the public slot on the board. And you have great experience, but I'm not so sure that everyone will completely, and I need you to help me figure out how they will, identify with you as the person that's their representative that will I totally believe in your heart and your love of the CSU, but I'm just having a little trouble aligning those. I'm going to tell you up front, I'm not going to oppose you. I may not be able to support you at this time, but I'm open. I'm not going to oppose you because of your wonderful long years of experience. I do think you know really a lot about this system. But I don't really exactly see how I can align the expectations of the public for some kind of reforming kind of action when their slot is maybe what they would consider an insider. So can you help me with that?
Well, I'll try. I think that no one agonizes over financial issues that I know tend to have a reverberating impact in the general public. If you're raising tuition, it is not something that people take kindly to, and I understand that. If you're raising salaries, even when we're not in these difficult times, it is hard sometimes for anyone most people to understand why this person is paid $300,000 a year. Why can't you find somebody to do that for $150,000 a year? And yet, when we raise tuition, it is because it is the only way that we can see to maintain access to higher education for an awful lot of people in this state. If we simply admit, retain, and educate the people that the budget, general fund budget, will provide to us, then we have to cut out an awful lot of students who can't get into our system. So tuition is in part a mechanism for trying to maximize access to higher education on the part of an awful lot of people. And as you know, Senator, I might have said this to you, and if not, I will say it here, that when we raise tuition, a third of all the money that comes in from tuition goes into state university grants. The net effect of a tuition increase in our system does not affect about 200,000 of our student enrollees, because they are funded through either state university grants, Pell grants, Cal grants, or something else. There's another category of people that are affected. They are basically the middle-class families who have, I think, carried the brunt of increases in higher education. And I have proposed to the Chancellor and to members of my board that we ought to see if we can't find ways to mitigate some of the cost of attending college to middle-class students. I don't have a good way of saying how we can deal with the perception of people that our salaries are too high, except that they should look at and hold us accountable for what we produce. We haven't done, I think, a very good job in telling the story of what we do. The president at San Diego State is an example I will use. There was an awful lot of concern about that presidency and the large salary he was getting. In the first 6 weeks he was there, he was online to raise $1.2 million for the university. In the first month that he was there, he personally committed to commit a significant portion of his salary to scholarships for students at his university. But most people don't know about those stories. And so when we hire presidents, it is for leadership in a variety of areas, and one of them is that we require every president that we hire to seek to match in private fundraising at least 10% of the general fund support that they get from the state. That is a requirement for every president that we appoint. So it looks bad on the metrics of it does not look very good, but then most people never see what's underneath the metrics. I struggle with how we can tell a story. I don't have a good answer. If you can give me some advice and counsel on how to do that better, I would be more than happy to have it.
I appreciate your answer, but if I could do that, I'd be sitting in your chair. That's not likely to happen.
So, you know, you might have to have this chair pretty soon.
When my husband says yes, I probably won't do it. I guess I really appreciate your answer. I'm going to let the others question you, but it comes back to even more than that. For me, it's a little bit of a public credibility issue. Through no fault of your own, you are serving in a public representative slot. Through no fault of your own, the contacts came along and you did the job as best you could and what you thought was right, and I appreciate that very, very much, because there's certainly not a way to please everybody in that situation.
Yes.
So now my job would be to convince others that your vast experience wouldn't alienate you from some of the public interests that slot is supposed to represent. So I'm working on sort of consolidating that thought, and I do believe some of Senator Alquist's stronger policies might be an answer to that. I do believe there are ways to do it. But at this point, I'm not convinced that I have the answer that would bring the others along, and that would be ultimately disappointing for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Senator DeLon, do you have questions?
Thank you, Senator Dutton. I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Carter, albeit somewhat very briefly. This morning. We spent a very short amount of time together, but I did enjoy very much the short meeting that we had. I want to welcome you, as well as your beautiful wife. It's evidently clear that she was a student at Cal State Dominguez Hills while you were the president at Cal State Dominguez Hills.
Thank you, sir.
And I want to, obviously recognize the two very fine gentlemen who come here in support of your person, Senator Curran Price and Assemblymember Steve Bradford. Two very fine gentlemen, and as you said, fine examples of two very strong leaders, not just in Sacramento, but their own respective communities. I appreciate your candor with regards to being open and recognizing that it was a mistake. I do appreciate that candor very much so, and not to come through a perspective of being condescending or paternalistic, but being respectful, towards your person. I very much do appreciate that. You said something to me that was that resonated with me. In that, unlike elected officials in the past, the titans of history, whether it's then Speaker Willie Brown, then Speaker Jess Unruh, whether it's President Pro Tem Dave Roberti, or Bill Lockyer, or John Burton, until just recently, that the members around this horseshoe, the members under this roof at this current time, those individuals, or books and legends are made of, had never faced, even remotely, even close, the gargantuan financial crisis that all of us are facing today.
That's right.
Not even close.
Yes.
And in your words, obviously these are the worst economic times since the Great Depression, So that's why I have a lot of admiration and respect, obviously, for my colleagues, around this horseshoe, as well as my colleagues who are here today, because, simply put, it doesn't even, again, come even close to what Willie Brown, Jess Unruh, and all the big titans ever endured and faced. Absent the whole issue of obviously term limits, having the longevity and continuity and the experience to tackle an issue like this would have helped nonetheless. But circumstances being, it would still have been very difficult for them to maneuver with very limited choices, in front of them. Let me deviate a slight bit, and I want to get your thoughts, your perspective. Obviously, in the last 3 years, we've cut roughly approximately $68 billion. It's a gargantuan sum of money that's had a disproportionate impact, negative impact on those of the middle class, but in particular the working poor, women, single women with children, students, and students of color. And I know that you care deeply with your roots your history, or your story, I should say, is a true, American story coming from Arkansas, Pine Bluff, University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, making out of here to California. A very familiar story of that sort of westward migration of the South and semi-wet South that is Arkansas, of black folks coming out looking for a better world, a better life, fleeing the currents, at that time, what the South was and the reality, and coming to California and finding out that you can start a new life and do well. You are a clear example of that, and I respect that and recognize that. Now, given the financial circumstances and the cuts that we have made, $68 billion in the aggregate the last 3 years, disproportionate impact on students, middle class, students of color, those students who you have historically advocated for during your various tenures within the Cal State system. Share your thoughts with me with regards to what we can do collectively, but more so as you, as the head of the trustees, and your colleagues to help with the hemorrhaging. And the reason why I say that is that we make the cuts, given the very limited tools that we have at our disposal. Once we make the cuts, you're given a certain budget. You make your own subjective decisions on what you want to do. Obviously, you made it very clear that it was a major mistake in terms of giving the pay raise and at the same time making the cuts on the students. But what we have here is I think, a lot of finger pointing going across, and there's a circular firing squad, which at the end of the day, the cuts still ensue. So what I want to do is I want to hear your thoughts with regards to solutions to deal with the hemorrhaging in the financial crisis, because it's not enough that trustees, the Cal State system, whether the presidents of the respective colleges or their trustees, or for that matter, the University of California, and the president or the chancellors or the regents themselves can say, please don't cut us any longer, stick out their hand, expect that we'll be able to give them what they need. It just doesn't work that way, because that's not a reality. So I want to hear from you, your perspective.
Thank you, Senator De Leon. I think there are 2 or 3 things in the issue that you propose. The first one is that it is no secret, I think, to anyone who pays attention, that the resources that are available to the allocators of values, and in this case I mean the legislature and the governing estate, that the resources that are available to you are woefully inadequate. Woefully inadequate. It is simply beyond comprehension that people in this state, at any level of cognizant reality, could believe that they could have everything that they want without paying for it. You must find a way, together with the administration, if that's possible, or some other way, to develop a better resource base for the policymakers in this state. That is answer number 1. Answer number 2 is that those of us who have responsibility for guiding tremendous enterprises that are funded by the state need to be very careful to assess how well we are utilizing the resources that we get. It is fairly easy to say, this is the way it's always been and this is the way it ought to be. I think that's not the case. Higher education is a costly enterprise. We have a tremendous investment in infrastructure. To what extent do we actually use that infrastructure to the maximum ability, maximum capability? Do we have classes 24/7? To what extent is technology a new ally in the teaching learning process? Can we educate more students using different ways to address those students? So there are a number of paths I think that we must take. But for me, it begins with the fact that you, as allocators of values in this state, do not have at your command the resources to do the best job that you can do.
Mr. Chair, if I may add 2 points. And I know this is your confirmation here today. And I do know that there are other members of the Board of Trustees who did vote along with you. Roberta Achtenberg, Carol Chandler, Deborah Farrar, Kenneth Fong, William Hack, who I know very well and respect very much, Bob Linscheid, Henry Mendoza, Peter Mayas, and Lou Monville, who also voted yes on the compensation too. So I just want to ask you this question because Ms. Alquist had articulated the angst that exists in the population today. And I remember listening to National Public Radio not too long ago, and the spokesperson for the president of San Jose State University, the current president, and I don't want to mispronounce his last name, Mohamed Koyumi?
Yes.
Koyami? Koyami. He currently makes, according to this chart, $328,200, and housing is provided to him as well. So in that light, I believe the spokesperson representing him and San Jose State University specifically, to paraphrase her, said that he has a very difficult and challenging job, given the fact that he has roughly 30,000 constituents, that being the students themselves, graduate, undergraduate, plus dealing with the politics and administration of dealing with faculty and other administrators. And I listen intently. And when you put it in context, I think we make roughly $99,000, I think base salary, whatever the per diem is, and we have 1 million constituents. We have 1 million constituents. And I know it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. But in light of the sensitivity of the current economic climate and the sense of angst that in the days when this wasn't an issue that became so acute in the voters' minds and eyes because no one ever grappled collectively together this financial morass, I'm sure that you are very sensitive and very much can appreciate in many of the members and what they've articulated. For that matter, what everyday voters have articulated, the sense of angst and anger, if you will, with some of the salaries in this current economic climate. Thoughts?
I can understand and appreciate the scenario that you paint. This nation, this state as a part of this nation, is caught up in a rather substantive debate about issues of equity and equality. And a good portion of that debate is around what can loosely be termed the haves and the have-nots. the people who seem to have it all against the people who seem to have very little of it. So I understand the sense of outrage that sometimes get expressed in these circumstances, and it gets expressed particularly when there's an economic downturn in the country. It gets really expressed. I can only say to you with respect to the decision on salaries, and let me just return to that again. It was a situation within the context which was not unusual. The board, when it made that decision, was following a pattern that it had made over the last 25 years. What do you do when you're setting salaries? You look at the comparative institutions which have been developed, which were developed by CPEC at the time and used for all of the years that CPEC was in existence. Comparatives that I might add had some of the same kinds of schools that we have in the present comparatives, and you say, what is the competition doing? And then you look at other factors. What kind of person is this? Does this person have the capacity not only to provide academic leadership, but administrative leadership and leadership in the area of fund development for the institution? And you come to what you believe is a fair and rational salary. And in yesterday's world, that was true. But in today's world, that's not true. There is probably no way that you can justify to the benefit of all of the public a salary of $325 a year for a president of a university system. When people are starving, are hungry, are being laid off, are unemployed, that's reality. And so you take that reality and you try to make the best judgment you can about how to best serve the interest of the people of California in those areas that you have responsibility for. That's what we do.
Okay. Thank you very much.
This is a very good discussion. I'd like to take my few minutes here and actually bore down on a few specifics around the CSU charge. As Senator De Leon and others asked the questions and you gave your answers about the importance of resources, I completely agree with you, and yet we face the reality we face with our state budget. Hopefully it's getting better. I think it is getting better. But what can we do in the meantime to save costs? I mean, for example, you mentioned technology. There is a movement out there around open educational resources to find better ways, while maintaining or enhancing quality, to bring down the cost of instructional materials, which can be larger than even the proposed fee increases, the actual fee increases gone into effect. And I'm wondering, just in general, your view, not so much on that, but on what we can be doing in the meantime to try to ease the burden on the middle-class families, the students, the folks who are in the middle who are struggling to be able to afford the education while we work towards economic recovery.
Well, I think there are a number of things we can do, and I happen to believe that in one area that I know is of some interest to you, that the CSU is in a leadership role across the country in trying to find ways to provide affordable textbooks to students. The average student in the CSU system spends about $1,000 a year on textbooks. That's obscene. And there are better ways to do this. We've been experimenting with a variety of ways on 2 campuses to see if there's some lessons we can learn about reducing costs to students in this regard. We find that you can set up systems to rent students textbooks instead of having them buy them. We find that you can develop e-books that are available to students through the electronic media that saves them the price of purchasing the book. We find that we can, through our digital libraries, provide an unbelievable resource of free information to students that will help them do their coursework. We have probably 1 million entries in our digital libraries that both faculty members and students can use to build their curriculums. We find, for example, that if we go to book publishers and say, we are the largest university system of its kind in the world, and we're not going to use your textbooks in our system unless you give us discounts, give our students discounts, you can achieve some savings. We've done that on 2 campuses. The savings of $300,000 on one, almost $400,000 on the other.
And how you bring it to scale across
We're going to bring it to
campuses.
scale across the system, and we will have that done within a year.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Some daunting statistics which often don't get enough attention in my view, and it relates to the fact that we have 100,000 K-12 teachers over the age of 50, many eligible for retirement. And when you look at the other side of the statistical ledger, the enrollment in both private and public teacher preparation programs in California declined by about 50% over the last decade. The state itself has been issuing about 40% fewer credentials now than we were in 2003-04. At the same time, we have a significant high school dropout problem and a lot of debate about curriculum and pedagogy. My personal view is that we ought to be teaching rigorous courses in high school that are taught in much more applied ways towards career pathways. My question for you, Mr. Chairman, is are you satisfied with the current state of the CSU teacher preparation programs? And if not, what ought we be doing to make them better?
The answer to the first part of your question is no, I'm not satisfied. When I assumed the chairmanship of the board, I announced to my colleagues that there were 3 issues that would command my attention in large measure while I was chair of the board. The first one had to do with transfer. We were operating in a system in California that was absolutely unacceptable in my judgment with respect to transfers. And with the help of one of your colleagues, Senator Padilla, we got a bill introduced to set up a new way of dealing with transfers.
Correct.
So we made progress in that area. The second area that I was concerned about was one of remediation. We had a process in this state where if a student, even though it met the eligibility requirements to come into our system, if they didn't pass at a higher enough level on the math test or the English test when they arrived, that they had to take remediation courses, and up to a year they could be taking non-credit courses. I think that is unacceptable. I believe that we can remediate students in an intensive way in 6 weeks. And so I sponsored the policy in the board to try to make that happen. It looks like that we're making good progress on that. We'll know at the end of this year whether or not that's working.
Teacher preparation.
The third area was teacher preparation. I look at situations where I'm told that students come to university unprepared to read or to write or sometimes to think, and the students get blamed. And I don't accept that. We produce about 2/3 of all of the teachers in this state. I have not been convinced that we are preparing them to be effective in the teaching and learning process that they engage once they leave our institutions. I am further convinced that we have lived in a society more recently that has argued that in order to be somebody, you had to have a college BA degree. I don't accept that logic. I think that we can do or should do a much better job in the educational process at the K-12 level with the teachers that we prepare to have economic education, work education as part of the curriculum, as part of, just as you have concerns about A to G, you ought to have concerns about how to expose students maybe through internships, through courseworks, to the world of work and achievement. And I believe that it is possible to do that. It will be a little longer haul because now we're not just talking about what we do, but what the Credentialing Commission does. I happened to be in the hallway yesterday leaving this building. I met the lady who's in charge of credentialing, and I said we need to talk. And we will talk next week.
Very good. Let's hear from witnesses in support of the nominee, please.
Can I ask one other
Senator
question?
Alquist had a follow-up question.
On a
Sorry.
different note, and I'll
Yes.
be brief, I wanted to ask about the question. It's got to do with student access. I understand two things. One, in order for a student to speak at your Board of Trustees meeting, they have to sign up 2 days in advance. Want to address that and see if there are ways that that can be changed, because I don't know that many 19-year-olds who are going to think 48 hours in advance to sign on to come over to a specific building and sign on the dotted line in order to make public comment at your meeting. And then the other thing I understand is that you do not webcast your meetings. And certainly with this age of technology and with students, I think students would really appreciate being able to
I believe
to see that.
I believe the second one is not correct. I believe we webcast
Okay, you do?
all of our sessions at the board.
Okay.
I believe that
Well,
is
then my
true.
information's wrong. But on the
But
first,
on the first one,
on the 48 hours?
we not only ask students, we ask anyone who wishes to address the board to give us early announcements about their interest and the area that they wish to speak on. There was some concern about that at the last meeting. The issue came up, and I pointed out to the person who raised the issue that in the 2 years that I have chaired the board, except on one occasion, has no one who wished to address the board not been permitted to do so, even though we ask that they sign up in advance. Providing the opportunity is there, I call them to speak.
So, but you still do request that I understand that most of the time you are able to allow them
Yes.
at the last minute to speak, but my thought really is it possible to change the policy? 48 hours seems quite large for students. And the other piece of it, or else is there a way to do it with technology that online they can just say, we want to speak at the meeting?
Let me back you up on this. If that is the policy, I think that should be changed. I mean, we don't have. We're the state senate here. We don't have.
We don't do that.
We don't have a 48-hour requirement for any person to come on in
I have the policy
to
here.
this room here and to be able to testify or yay or nay or any of the nominees.
Yeah.
That could be. I could imagine that being chilling on a 19-year-old who would say, "Well, geez, they might not even show up in the first place. I get you're gracious and that you'll allow anybody to talk, but that's a." If that is the policy, that's a bit of a weird. That's a bit of a weird policy.
It is the policy, Mr. Chairman, and I can only say to you that it is one that I inherited, and I always think there's a learning opportunity in every encounter in my life, and I will learn something about this one.
Thank you. Good. Okay, let's hear from witnesses in support of the nominee, please.
Mr. Chairman and members, Steve Juarez on behalf of the UC Office of the President. It's a rare occasion, I would admit, when we come up to speak on behalf of one of the other segment's nominees, but I want to tell you, I think it's wholly appropriate given the collaborative spirit that Mr. Carter has created and the collaborative environment that we share with him as well as community colleges and CSU. And for that reason, we think he is very worthy of your support and wish him well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support. Assemblymember Bradford, Senator De Leon did welcome you. If you want to testify, you're more than welcome, of course. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the community, my name is Mike Reynolds. I'm with the California State Conference of the NAACP. We're here in support of Mr. Carter today for the Board of the Trustees of the California
Board of Trustees.
CSU
The
trustees?
CSU trustees.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Other witnesses in support? Assembly member, welcome to the Senate Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senators. I'm just here to lend my support to Dr. Carter. He's an individual that I've known for pretty close to 30 years. I was one of those impressionable young students at Cal State Dominguez Hills during his interim as president, and he helped guide me through my senior year as well as direct me as I was doing my paralegal studies there. So I know his commitment to education. I know his commitment to the student body and the overall goals and objectives that this committee is concerned about as we deal with the fiscal challenges here. I know that's at the forefront of the activity that he's going to do as a trustee, and I think we're well served to have Dr. Carter in this capacity, so I'm here to support.
Mr. Chair, I just want to underscore it. I was told that Mr. Bradford was a troubled young person before Dr. Carter took him under his wing and became a disciple.
Let the record reflect. Very good. Are there any witnesses in opposition? Okay. Let me make a suggestion about how we handle the next few minutes. Chair Carter's 365th day is February the 29th. I look forward to enthusiastically supporting your confirmation. And I appreciate your candor, especially as it comes to admitting a mistake that doesn't always happen in the way that you express so in public life. I also just appreciated your thoughtfulness around a whole wide range of issues. I would prefer, given the importance of this position, that we see if the committee itself can, and we may or may not be able to, get to a place where this nomination could pass out of committee unanimously. I'm not sure that that's the case today, and it may not be the case today, it may not be the case next week. But I would like to put it over for a week for just you don't have to come back, for 2 weeks. Okay, which would put us to February the 15th. The committee will then take up the nomination. Again, I intend to support it. And that will give us a couple of weeks to just have some more conversation and see if we can come to a consensus. If not, then we can't, but that'll be the 15th, which will leave plenty of time then to get to our Senate floor well before the 29th of February. All right.
I have one word.
Of course.
Let me just say how much I appreciate what you've done and what you do, and how much I appreciate your openness to the conversations that we've had over the last couple of days, and for some of us who have had conversations that go back a while. I have a great deal of respect for you, and I know better than most of you think the challenges that you face. I'm not here to create more problems for you. I want to help you solve them.
Thank you very much. And we always say the confirmation process should not be the end of your relationship with the individual members of the legislature or with the branch itself, but really hopefully the beginning. So we'll put this off till the 15th of February. We'll come back for a vote, again, for vote only.
And I do not have to come back.
You do not have to come back.
Okay, thank you.
And we will go from there. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Carter. Chair Carter, very good. All right, let's see if we can get through the remainder of the agenda. Are there any issues with items 3 through 16? Number 16, you said? Okay, then let's take up items 3 through 15.
Do you want to add 1 to that, item 1 as well?
Yes, I'm sorry, the reference of bills. Item 1, then 3 through 15. Is there a motion since we haven't had one today?
So moved.
Moved by Senator Fuller. Please call the roll.
Senators Alquist?
Aye.
Alquist, aye. DeLeon? DeLeon, aye. Fuller?
Aye.
Fuller, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg,
that
aye.
passes 5-0. And item 16, is there anything in particular, Senator Dutton?
Explaining what my concern is on that, and I'm probably going to abstain, is the resolution in question ends up making some assertions that my understanding isn't true. It makes reference in the language. It says that it kind of infers that if you get the HPV vaccination, that somehow there's a guarantee you're not going to get cancer, and that's just not true. And that's the way the resolution's written. It almost like it implies that. And so that was the reason for my concern when I read it. It's just that I'd have to abstain on it, but so that was my concern about it.
I'm sorry, can you point me again to the line, to the page?
It's, I think it's in towards the last where, therefore, what, I can't remember. I don't have the actual resolution. I can't find it. It's the last resolve. It says that the legislature encourages prompt access to preventative services, including pap smears. I'm sorry. It's the second resolve that says the legislature encourages prompt access to preventative services, including pap smears, HPV vaccinations, and high-quality medical care and treatment. It's my understanding that the reference to the emphasis being placed on HPV vaccinations, there's no real proof that is going to be, it's almost like it's assuring that if you do this, that you're not going to have a problem, and that's the reason why I've got a problem.
I'm not sure that I read it the same way, but...
I just wanted to explain to the committee why I was going to abstain.
Fair enough, sir. Let's, we'll have a motion for Senator Alquist. Let's call the roll on the measure. Thank you.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Dutton? Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
That passes 3-0. Thank you. Is there any executive session? Anything else to come before us? If not, I thank you all for your patience. It was a lengthy hearing, but I thought it was productive. We'll stand in adjournment.